by imagining that we were able to move 1 million people from poverty to a life of dignity. Too many people we know are trapped in a system that doesn't work. And that's why we are here today with the Alliance for Opportunity. The Alliance for Opportunity is a multi-state project to advance a poverty relief agenda that aims to free 1 million people from poverty in 10 years. We actually started last year. The clock is ticking. We've got 9 years to go. We believe that the best way to do this is by fostering pathways to work and empowering local communities to support the needs of those who are struggling. The Alliance for Opportunity actually has more than 30 ideas to do just this. Many of them we think are pretty novel. Today, we are going to talk about 3 of those transformational ideas with the CEOs representing the Alliance. As mentioned, while well-intentioned, we think that the safety net system is failing to only temporarily help those in need. The safety net should catch those who are falling, but also set people back on their feet on a pathway to dignity and human flourishing. Work is the key to relieving poverty. Employment is a fundamental step toward restoring personal dignity and purpose and getting individuals on a pathway to success. As mentioned, my name is Rachel Barkley. I have personal experience with kind of a failure of the safety net. Some of you know my story. In 2019, I became disabled shortly after having my first child, and I fell out of the workforce for a year because of medical issues. And my caseworkers in the hospital brought me stacks of paperwork, all these different programs that I could sign up for as a now disabled person, and workforce programs to help get me back to work. There's one catch. By the way, I was a quadriplegic at the time, and my hands didn't work, yet I had stacks of paperwork that I had to fill out. I couldn't drive anymore, but somehow I had to make it across town to offices to do interviews, to sign up for these programs that were going to help me get to work. And then after I did the interviews, I would have to wait months to get help, equipment in my car so that I could drive with my hands now, and other supports that were supposed to help me get to work physically from this workforce program for people with disabilities. And thankfully, I had a robust social safety net that raised money charitably for me. I had a family that was there to drive me places to help me. I had all of the robust social supports that I wish that we all had. And this work is very personal to me because I know not everybody has those supports I have, and people fall through the cracks. So our 3 institutes, the Georgia Center for Opportunity, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and the Pelican Institute for Public Policy in Louisiana, have come together in this unique effort. So while GCO, TPPF, and Pelican are working on this work is available for any state that wants to join in the efforts. You can go to allianceforopportunity.com, and the policy roadmap is there. We believe that these efforts have to start at the state level. And in fact, we have kind of a roadmap for how this worked. In 1996, the biggest modern welfare reforms happened because they started at the state level. Governors went ahead and started implementing reforms, and then they went up to DC and said, this is working. This is getting people out of poverty. And bipartisan reform happened with a Democratic president and a Republican Congress. That was a long time ago, but we think that something like that can happen now, but reform must happen at the state and local level first. And we need the voices in this room to get started on it. We created this policy toolkit that I mentioned is on the website. It is a roadmap that's created by economists, former state legislators, former White House staff, think tank scholars from all of the states and different disciplines. And it works in 3 buckets to empower individuals. First is safety net reform. Second is workforce reforms. And third is criminal justice reforms. So that is what our policy roadmap entails. And these three wonderful executives are going to go into more detail. I'll introduce them, and they will share with us what these three transformational reforms are. First here is Randy Hicks, the president and Chief Executive Officer of the Georgia Center for Opportunity. Under his leadership, GCO has successfully led statewide efforts to improve access to quality education for low-income children, to promote strong families, boost adoption safety, increase employment opportunities for ex-offenders and the chronically underemployed. Over the past decade, he and his team have launched 12 community-based initiatives in Georgia that work to strengthen marriages and families at the local level. Next, we have Daniel Erspamer. Under Daniel's leadership, the Pelican Institute has generated policy victories in the areas of ed reform, criminal justice reform, state spending innovation, and occupational licensing that passed this year. Very exciting. He'll tell us more about it. And over the course of his career, he has mentored hundreds of nonprofit leaders, raised tens of millions of dollars for opportunity policy initiatives, and achieved meaningful policy wins across the nation. And lastly, we have our wonderful host, Greg Sindelar, here from the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He's the CEO. He has been here since 2007 and has helped oversee year over year averaging 25% growth at TPPF. Yes, very excellent work. Helped with this beautiful location, setting it up, and excitingly was promoted to CEO last year. Very well deserved. So we will kick off with Randy to tell us a little bit more about the vision and our first policy idea called the Utah model.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. And thank you all for being here. Thank you also to those who are viewing this online. I want to tell a little bit of a story that I think kind of captures the essence of why we're doing what we're doing. It wasn't long ago that an Atlanta businessman invited a single mom, Shannon, into his office on a Friday afternoon and gave her a promotion and a pay raise. She left his office that day with tears in her eyes because she was proud of what she'd accomplished. But on Monday, so that was Friday, on Monday, she returned to the office and in tears turned it all down. Why is that? It's because she rightly determined that she would lose thousands more in government assistance than she was going to gain in pay. We hear stories like this all the time of people turning down jobs, turning down job promotions, walking off of shifts to avoid what is called a benefits cliff, where suddenly they're actually, because of public policy, being punished for working too much, if that's possible. So it's interesting, though. I think there's a lot to be said about what we're addressing by just thinking about Shannon's tears. It was a couple of years before it hit me that her tears tell the whole story. Her tears on Friday were kind of tears of pride, right? She had accomplished something. Her tears on Monday were tears of disappointment. If it was just about material well-being, there would have been no tears. It would have been a very calculated decision about income and income only. The tears reflected a loss of opportunity. It reflected disappointment that she wasn't going to be able to pursue a career. And this, to a large degree, is the problem with our safety net system. Let's concede that it's probably well-intentioned, some question of that, but let's assume it is. The reality, though, is that this is the kind of thing that happens. And I want you to think about yourself as you hear about Shannon's story. Think about what it means to be human. Think about what it means to be you. And you recognize that a job is more than just a source of income, right? It's a sort of source of pride, purpose, sense of well-being that comes from, earning success, enjoying the fruits of your labor and being needed, right? Sense of purpose and belonging. So as we look at our work at GCO and in the alliance with these two organizations at our side, we believe strongly that we have life-changing and life-affirming ideas for all Americans, certainly, but particularly for those who may need them most. People whose vision may have dimmed a bit because of their circumstances, and people who have inherent dignity and the capacity, like Shannon, to build a good life. So you're going to hear a lot of those thoughts or things that reflect that inherent dignity that we see in our fellow Americans who really are struggling to kind of make it into the workplace, become self-sufficient, and care for their families. Now, the thing I want to talk about, you're going to hear three different ideas. We're talking about three big transformational ideas. The one I want to talk about is something that was done in Utah. Remember, Rachel just described a problem we have, and that is you've got multiple offices to go to when you're on government assistance because you've got multiple programs that you're seeking assistance from. It's difficult to navigate for the individual. Well, in the state of Utah, they took their workforce services and combined them with human services, with their government assistance programs. And what that meant was that you gave individuals a single place to go to first look for work, to consider what kind of jobs might be out there, and secondly, to get the assistance they need while they wait to find that job or as they work to get that job. What's really different about the Utah model, excuse me, what's really different about the Utah model, and by the way, it's the only state in the country that's done this, and the reason it's the only state to have merged the workforce services and welfare assistance is because there's federal policy that prohibits other states from doing it. They did it before a program was developed by the federal government 20 years ago or so. And once that program was developed, they prohibited the merging of those two services. But what's happened in Utah, because they brought those things together, is that, for instance, and we discovered this kind of accidentally, when COVID happened and then everything began to reopen and the economy began to climb again a bit, Utah recovered the fastest by far. Their employment numbers caught quickly up to where they were pre-COVID. And they actually went on to hit their pre-COVID projections of employment. So the whole idea behind the Utah model is that rather than sending people through this confusing maze, send them to one place. There's no wrong door. You go into this place and you look for work, which gives you dignity, hope, opportunity, all those kinds of things. But then you also get support with government assistance programs. Now, one of the things we're doing right now, and won't go into great detail now because these guys want to talk, is we are working on a federal reform that will allow us to do that in all 50 states, should the states want to. So,
thanks, Randy. Yes, we can dive more into that later, but we are going to go to the second reform with Daniel. This is actually reflecting some big wins in Louisiana this state session. So Daniel, can you tell us about occupational licensing reform and how that is related to poverty relief?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here. You know, if you've never had to deal with an occupational licensure board, you might think of it as a minor nuisance on the way to a job, or you might think about it even as a good thing, right? Protecting health and safety of consumers. That's the argument that gets used most often in favor. This can seem like something that, you know, is really not something to worry about. And in fact, decades ago, it wasn't much. About 5% of jobs in the United States required you to get permission from the government in the form of an occupational license. Today, across the country, that's closer to 1 in 4. Imagine that for a minute. 1 in 4 jobs in this country requires you to get a permission slip from the government to do that work. And as it relates to poverty, Randy just eloquently talked about the benefits of work. We know not just the ability to earn a living, but the joy and fulfillment that comes from it. And yet what we've done is set up government programs that actually block work. And here's why. These boards that offer licenses, they work kind of like a cartel, right? Their job is to control supply and crush competition. And that's exactly what happens. And so this has a particularly bad effect and problematic impact on those communities of color, on low-income communities, and certainly people trying to come out of poverty, not to mention individuals who've had a touch with the justice system. We make it even that much harder to find work. And if there's anything we know about how to prevent recidivism, the repeat incident of crime, it is getting individuals back into a community, back into work. And that has powerful impact across lots of things we care about. So the question is, how did we get here and what do we do about it? And it makes sense. If you're in an industry, you don't want a lot of competition. I'll give you an example from Louisiana too. The first is we are the only state in the country to require florists to receive a license. Now, that means all of you here in the audience in Texas have been sending, I don't know if you know this, but you've been buying and giving and sending flowers, and you are creating a public health crisis. You have been endangering the individuals, your loved ones, your parents, your fiancés, with florists that are unlicensed here in Texas. I just hope you realize what great danger you are in.
No excuses for the husbands.
I'm happy to tell you in Louisiana, we are fully protected by the government in safe licenses. This is insane. How did it get here? Well, if you're an incumbent florist, do you want more competition? You do not. So how does this work? If you want to be a florist, you go before the florist board, which is made up of your future competition, and you have to get approved by them. Well, if your address is just down the road, perhaps from someone who currently is in business, do you think you're going to get approved? Now, I will say it used to be worse. Now it's a test and a fee and approval. Previously, several years ago, before some reforms, you used to have to do a practical exam to get your florist license. You would walk into the room, they would give you an assignment, you would arrange flowers, and the board would decide, was that good enough or not? Did it meet the standards of the board in order to get your license? Now, we all realize this is ridiculous, but let me tell you, when we fought in the legislature this year to bring reforms to occupational licenses, the boards came out of the woodwork. They fought these tooth and nail, and believe it or not, we had a state official come to the table to defend the florist license. This is crazy. These boards have enormous power. I'll give you another real tangible story. Last year, we met a gentleman in Lafayette, Louisiana. His name is Daltonio Allaire. And Daltonio is a barber. He's been a licensed barber, actually, since he was 18 years old. He's been working in a barber shop, cutting hair. And of course, what happened? The pandemic closed any sort of salons or barbershops. So now here he is, a young man with a daughter that just was born, and now he can't go to work. He can't find work. What did he do? Instead of sitting at home, Daltonio did what we'd all want him to do. He said, let's find another way to do this. So he scraped together all of his life savings. He bought an old van and he outfitted it to be a mobile barbershop. He went to the city of Lafayette, Louisiana, and got his permit from the city. He went to the Department of Health and got his permit there. He was already a licensed barber. Off he set in March or April of 2020. His customers loved it, right? Because now they can actually get a haircut when they couldn't before. And it's in the safety of their front porch or the van, whatever worked for them. He said he would drive around town. The kids are waving. He's honking the horn. It was a great situation. And finally, he's not working for someone else. He's working for himself. He's building a business. He's creating a life. Well, unfortunately, the barber board called. By the way, there's separate barber and cosmetology boards. The barber board called and said, I'm sorry, we don't allow mobile barbershops in Louisiana. And he said, well, I understand. I'm licensed. I have my permit. What do I need to do? Just let me know. I will, do what I need to do to get this done. And they said, no, you don't understand it. It will never be allowed. And the reason they justified it was because of the word in the regulation that used the word premises. And they decided to define premises as a bricks and mortar location that could not be satisfied in a mobile operation. So they shut him down. He went to a lawyer. He said, "What can I do?" The lawyer said, "There's nothing you can do, because this was a rule that was made through the regular rulemaking system. It followed the Administrative Procedures Act, and there was no means to challenge this." Well, thankfully, Daltonio was brave enough to share his story. You can see that video, and Daltonio tell you this in his own words on our website, the pelicanpolicy.org. But what he did is he stepped forward. He came to the legislature, Daltonio and his mom, several times. First time he'd ever walked in the Capitol building, like most citizens of our states. And he told his story. And you know what happened? People began to understand the problem. And Daltonio's testimony and story, along with a lot of other people who came, led to the landmark passage of something we called the Right to Earn a Living Act. And what it says is the legislature set forth a set of standards to say, yes, there are some places where health, safety, welfare of our citizens might justify some sort of process to require a license or a certification. It said they had to use the least restrictive means possible to meet those health and safety standards. And most importantly, what it said is, if these boards don't have a justification that meets those standards, there's a pathway to sue them and hold them accountable through the courts. And that's the only way we get real accountability here, is if there's some mechanism to actually enforce it beyond just a sort of growing government bureaucracy, right? So and here's the other thing, this bill had bipartisan support. It had a Democrat author. We had, I believe, 18 co-authors that spanned the chair of the conservative caucus to the chair of the Black caucus and everybody in between. And it passed with 0 dissenting votes, despite an aggressive effort by the boards and commissions, by lots of testimony and fighting against this bill. But what happened was the public understand, just like we understand, that this is absolutely ridiculous. Now, we have a lot more work to do. The legislature also passed a great reform that allowed individuals who've had a touch with the justice system to have a better, more transparent pathway to work. What we found is that individuals who had perhaps had been incarcerated or some touch with the justice system, you wouldn't necessarily know before you went to apply whether or not you could get a license in that work. And so you might take out a student loan to get extra work. You might go through a process only to be told later, because of language in these regulations that include things like moral turpitude and good character. So the process put into place the ability for transparency for disqualifying offenses, right? We could understand if you're embezzling money, maybe CPA isn't the job for you, right? There's some reasonable things we can all take into account, but just putting barriers to work is absolutely unacceptable. So we have more work to do on this, and most states do. This is a problem not just in Louisiana, but everywhere. As I mentioned, almost 1 in 4 jobs now require a license, and I'll close on this. It has a deep connection into the work and poverty, not only because of pathways to work, but some of these requirements involve a bachelor's degree when it's not necessary. In Louisiana, one of 4 states to require a license for interior designers, they require you to have a bachelor's degree to have that job. Well, we know if you're coming from a disadvantaged community or low-income community, you probably are less likely to have a degree or have that opportunity. So this has a direct impact, and they're just illogical. And it's just flat wrong. But we can fix it, and that's part of what we're doing here at the Alliance. One of, again, a number of reform opportunities here in Texas and Georgia, and continued work in Louisiana and around the country. This can change, but we have to draw attention to it. We have to tell these stories, and bold reform as possible. So thanks for letting me share that. And I know we've got some more great stuff to talk about with Greg.
Thank you, Daniel. Very inspiring story of Daltonio. Gets me every time. I hope that you all are catching the ethos behind what does success look like. You know, I mentioned our goal to get 1 million people out of poverty. We're defining that in a new way that kind of breaks a left-right construct. So some on the left and maybe government agencies say that we've had success in this realm, by counting the number of people who've been through programs. And I think we can see how there are flaws in that. So, that's not success, saying X amount of people were on food stamps. Some on the right would say we're having success if we are kicking X amount of people off of programs, or X amount of people just leave the programs. Well, we know that might not be successful, because there's a cycle where they continue a revolving door back on the programs. What we are really focused on, which is hard work, we would say, is that we are moving people from poverty, from dependence on programs and systems, into lives of self-sufficiency and flourishing, exciting jobs like a mobile barber station, or this new vision. So I hope you're catching that distinction. In that vein, we have a really exciting novel policy idea that Greg is going to tell us about from TPPF and the 3 organizations.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And thank you to everyone for being here. I hope you're enjoying your Chick-fil-A in honor of our friends from Georgia. I think we missed out. We should have had beignets for dessert. I don't know what we were thinking. But, when you listen to what Randy had to say and what Daniel had to say and some of the stories they told, right, what we're seeing is is just a waste of potential. There's so much that the individuals that are caught in this generational poverty on these systems are not able to give and not able to achieve. And, I once heard a football coach say that the worst word in the English dictionary was potential, because it means you haven't achieved anything. And that is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to unlock that potential and actually help people through these programs, and understanding that there is a reason to have these safety nets. But to get to Rachel's point, they shouldn't be permanent, and they should have a success sequence to get them off of there, so that they can actually unlock that dignity and that promise that they have, and get to work and do something for their themselves and their families. So one of the things that we're looking at here, obviously we're very interested in the Utah model here in Texas, and if that federal law changes, we're right there with Randy and hoping that happens. And occupational licensing is another big thing that we worked on here in Texas, but we have been looking at a thing that we call empowerment accounts. So what is an empowerment account, right? And that is that we want to put people back in control of these systems and getting off of them. And so we really look at it in what I call the 3 C's, right? Consolidation, community, and control. And so working backwards, like, we want the people on these programs to actually have a say in how that's happening, because what you are seeing is they might have a housing stipend, but they would actually prefer to maybe be closer to their job, and therefore their housing stipend doesn't help them live closer, but they're saving money when it comes to food or childcare or something like that. And we want them to actually own that and be able to make these budgeting decisions like you and I do every day, so that they can make the best decisions for them and their families. And so that kind of puts them back and in control of what is actually happening in their lives, and gives them some agency and some expectations on managing all of that. With that, right, it comes to the community aspect, right? We would want a single community advocate to help them along that path. So this is financial literacy. This is also helping them navigate all of these things that are happening, because we know when people have support and structure in their communities, they are more successful, more likely to actually get to that next level and get off of these programs. And then third is consolidation, right? Like, there's all these different programs that we talked about. Rachel really hit on this when she's telling her story, is that you have all of these different programs, all these different people that you have to talk to and get to, and by consolidating this, we can bring this to a single point of contact, so these people can actually navigate the programs and focus on working, as opposed to making sure that they're getting the benefits that they're entitled to on these programs. Also, with that, we spend a tremendous amount of money when it comes to the administration of all of these programs. In Texas alone, we spend over $600 million just in administration of all these different programs. And so you could save a significant amount of that money and put it back into actually helping people through these success sequences. And so that is a big push on ours. We're hoping in this next legislative session to pass a pilot program that would allow us to do that through some federal block grants that are available, and show that there's a proof of concept and success in this, so that we can then broaden it across our state and take it to other states as well.
Thanks, Greg. And it's all of these, I just listened to it, just makes sense, right? We have this labyrinth of programs that have just been piled on over the years, administered by different agencies, and the heart of the individual who's being served is not taken accounted for. And so these are all good practical reforms. I want to take a step back and take moderator's privilege here and ask a question of why now? So I think we all probably read the headlines and see that we're technically in a recession, that inflation is climbing, that the economic situation is kind of unstable right now. Why is this coming 2023 state session and this coming year? Why now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll take first stab. Yeah, I guess we're in a technical recession. I don't think most people would think that there's anything technical about it. OPEC just cut production by 2 million barrels per day today. So gas prices are going to go back up. So people are going to really be feeling this. But, why now? I would say, why not now, right? Like there are people that feel like they are trapped and cannot get out of it. And every day that we wait, the more the people fall further and further behind. And so it is, when you look at what is happening in the economy and what is happening in these people's lives, it is, I feel, a moral imperative to act now to ensure that they actually have the ability to achieve the American dream, which is what we are all trying to do. So, I would kind of throw it back and say, why would you not do it now? Because the time is now to act.
Yeah. And I'd echo what Greg just said. The reality is, we started coming together before COVID occurred because we recognized the problem existed. The problems we have described existed. Something very intentional, needed to be done. We decided we wanted to do that together. All that's happened since then, is that we had a major economic shutdown. Now we have inflation and we have a recession and we've got all these challenges, but our sense of urgency hasn't wavered a whole lot. I do think the opportunity is greater because there's a greater sensitivity to the plight of so many Americans.
Well, I think we're at a time where we can open it up to the audience for some Q&A. I hope you all have burning questions. We have Erica walking around with the mic. I think you can just raise your hand if you have a question. I think in the middle here.
Are you
You okay, Erica?
First of all, I'd like to thank all four of you. I can count. All three of you fine-looking gentlemen and a lovely lady. On the safety net, it occurs to me that the safety net actually works both ways. It both keeps people from falling down, but also keeps people from coming back up. What specific thing would you do, say you were running for state senate, as a policy question? What would you do in Texas to help remove that barrier to moving back up?
You want to take a step here?
Well, Georgians know better than me, right? No, I'll take a first stab at that, right? Like, yeah, I think you're right. We were talking about this earlier. These safety nets should be more like a trampoline, right? Like they should absolutely catch you. And you could, as Rachel said at the beginning, we concede that you need these safety nets and you don't want people to kind of fall all the way down, but there should be a sequence to get them back on their feet. And so I think, that's why we're kind of pushing the empowerment accounts, is that gives people some skin in the game and actually like puts them back in charge of this so that we can train and educate them and get them back in the workforce and moving in. Because as we talked about in the beginning, this all starts with work. Like there's such dignity in that when you're working and providing for yourself and your family. And the more that we can encourage that through our policies, the better. And that's why the Utah model is great. That's why empowerment accounts are great. That's why the occupational licensing is so important. These are all things I think would actually move us further in that direction. Randy, Daniel?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd add much to that. The reason why you heard Greg talk about empowerment counts, you heard me talk about the Utah model. In both cases, what we're talking about is consolidating programs and streamlining programs to make it more navigable for your average American who's getting government assistance. And truly, we really are true believers in what we're talking about when it comes to the three things we just spoke about. We think the Utah model is absolutely vital because it starts with the premise that somebody who is work capable should be given an opportunity to work. That's where the conversation starts, rather than let's figure out, go here and get this assistance, go cross town and get that assistance. You heard Rachel talking about her experience. That happens to millions of Americans every day, every week, every month, right? So they're, going all over the place to get assistance. Oh, and then in the midst of that, they've got to figure out if they can get a job. How about one place where they can figure out where they are from a government assistance perspective, and at the same time be directed to those programs and opportunities that give them the ability to enter the workforce? That's life-changing stuff. So again, this isn't just, hey, let's change the system for us. It is about the people who will benefit, and that safety net will become less of a snare net and more of a trampoline, as Greg described it.
If I could just add one additional thing, getting into this work, it's overwhelming. I heard somebody say we don't have a social safety net system in America. We have a whole bunch of different programs that don't work with each other. And so this may sound overly simplistic, but just doing something, getting started will change people's lives in meaningful ways. And having leaders in the legislature who are willing to take that on is so critical. Secondly, I'll make a plug for our website. The Alliance for Opportunity has 39 different solutions that states can take up to address all of these problems, and research and ideas that come out of that. I'd encourage, if you're a lawmaker or a candidate in the audience or watching on the stream, go look at those, because that will give you the beginning of a roadmap. There's some federal reform, as Randy and Rachel mentioned, that needs to happen. And then that roadmap gets even bigger. But these are things we can do right now. We can really get started on, and they'll have a meaningful impact on people's lives, because you're absolutely right. And the Georgia Center for Opportunity has done incredible work actually mapping what they call the benefits cliffs, where we see the points at which people get stuck in the system very clearly, because, like Randy's story about Shannon at the beginning, but it just doesn't make sense. We've disincentivized work. In some cases, we've disincentivized family formation. And these are things that help people move to that self-sufficiency and dignity that we all desire. So it's a lot, and it's a lot to learn. It's a lot to wrap your head around, but just getting started down that roadmap is a powerful way to help.
And I'll add a little bit to my own question of why now. Not only are we in this unique economic time, but we are also at the end of 2021, a lot of federal kind of cash checks to people. I mean, I got the child tax credit. I'm sure a lot of middle income people got the child tax credit money in their bank accounts that were plussed up. That was a lot of cash infusion into people's wallets that allowed people to sit on the sidelines and not work for a little bit. So we were in this very unique set of time where people had savings. They didn't have to work. Some people now have large gaps on their resume from those years of not working, and question. I think I hear in the headlines about quiet quitting. Even if they are working, they're kind of ghosting out of the workplace. And even this attitude towards work, I think it is a moral imperative for anyone working in the public policy space to think about, how are we creating every pathway towards work and clearing all the brush out of the way for anyone who wants to work to get there.
As a game theory economist by training, it would seem to me that what we should be doing for Shannon is putting 10 grand in her 401k for accepting that promotion and jumping off that cliff, right? Because we're saving the lifetime entitlement cost of her case. So every incentive should be the other direction. We should be doubling her benefits for when she takes that promotion and takes that job. Is anyone doing that? Any states that we know of doing that? Are they taking all that money they're going to save when a person exits the social safety net and giving part of it to the person. And then we also have a lot of problems in homelessness work and other poverty where the EIC is basically lump summed as a tax refund check rather than smoothed out over the year. So we all, if you have a used car, sell it around tax time because they're worth twice as much because everybody has that check in their pocket and then they can't afford food 2 months later. Are there programs like that where the incentives can actually return to the rightful place?
So right over your shoulder is the expert in our network on welfare programs, government assistance programs. And when you asked your first question about it, are they doing anything with savings and putting them, and basically rewarding people for work? The answer is no. There's nothing like that going on. To your second question, Eric, I'd be interested if you have any thoughts about the second one regarding smoothing out the cash payments.
It's a real problem. The earned income tax credit. I mean, actually, under Ronald Reagan, we had a program where people could actually get it on a monthly basis. But under the Obama administration, they took that away. And so right now you have to wait until you file for your taxes. And only when you get your tax refund, you can get it. You can get that money. And so you get basically a lump sum at the end of the tax year. And so it doesn't provide them with the monthly payments. Just think about the lack of budgeting skills, all the kind of ramifications of that. There are some proposals in Washington, D.C. of trying to addressing that, but, nothing's really happened and it just kind of persists.
One of the big challenges here, and this is your question about that, and the problem kind of points to perhaps the primary weakness of the government being so heavily involved in welfare programs. And that is typically they can only think about a person from a material measurement, right? And it's at a certain point in time. But the reality is, we're body, soul, mind, spirit, right? We've got longings for purpose and meaning and all those kinds of things. But so this is one of the major problems. One of the benefits of the Utah model, going back to that, is that the idea also is to connect an individual through that one office to the community, much like Greg talked about on empowerment accounts. Connect them to the community, connect them to a mentor, engage in case management. So you're dealing with a real person based on their circumstances, as opposed to strictly a material measurement. So that's a massive change and one of the primary reasons we're trying to get at this.
Yeah, and I think, Joe, you highlighted a really important issue that there's so many perverse incentives in the way this is set up. You see it in homelessness too, and the delivery issues are the same, and it causes a lot of these issues that where people who aren't equipped to handle a lump sum payment, that we're putting an anchor around them and sinking them because we're not actually helping them achieve anything the way it's set up. Yeah.
And also, we nothing as drastic as the kind of bonus you mentioned, but in the empowerment accounts, we do try to make the incentives right, that instead of getting your set checks every month for each program that you spend down because you're incentivized towards doing that, and then no skills about holistic budgeting, and like I do when I spend too much on groceries that month, well, I've got to cut in another area, and that sort of thing that we all do with our budgets. So empowerment accounts have this kind of financial literacy piece built into them, but also an incentive towards your savings doesn't get wiped away. It gets put, once you're off the program, if you have saved every month a portion of that money, you get to keep it and use it for, kind of like an HSA approved expenses, but it doesn't expire when you're off the program because we don't want to disincentivize savings.
All right, so this is one mainly for Daniel. So my wife is actually director of regulatory compliance in the state. So she implements the North Carolina Dental Board statute here. And one question I had is, a lot of what you discussed was more legislative, right? going beyond that, what do we do in terms of reforming regulatory structures, rulemaking processes? One of the things that's the biggest challenge in her job is that, if you're gonna disapprove a rule, then it becomes all of a sudden a political issue, right? You have the board's going to push back on that, et cetera. Like even if we can pass good laws, how do we ensure that those get implemented, right? I mean, the best thing to do is to get rid of a lot of boards, but in not being able to do that, what's kind of the steps in between?
It is a great question. It gets really nerdy, which I'll try not to go too much.
I'm definitely a nerdy side. So.
This gets into bigger questions of administrative deference. Where the legislature is in all of our states, certainly in the federal government, is empowered to make laws, right? And what happens is they make all too often broad sort of general laws, and then the regulatory agencies have all sorts of authority to change it and to do what they want. And over time, the courts have deferred to the administrative agencies. And so whether it's in licensure or some other small business regulation or environmental regulation, whatever it may be, you see just this incredible boom, as you noted, of the regulatory world. And that has really chilling effects on entrepreneurs, on job growth, on everything else. So I would suggest a couple of things. The idea, like the Right to Earn a Living Act, that's legislative, but what it does is it actually puts it changes the legal definition, or the legal standard rather, by which the courts look at these regulatory deference cases. It's really important. The legislature has directed how those cases are to be considered. And that changes the game for people like Daltonio and others who had no pathway to challenge. The second, and there's some great work being done by the Pacific Legal Foundation and others on again, super wonky for a moment, I apologize, but the Administrative Procedures Act reforms and empowering the legislature to take on a more active role in approving or rejecting rules made by the regulatory agencies. So what's happened is it's a classic sort of balance of power question, and we have deferred far too much, in my opinion anyway, to the executive and the regulatory state that needs to be brought back by the elected legislature or legislators. So again, there's a whole bunch of stuff you could get into, and I don't have all the answers by a long stretch, but you're absolutely right. This is a symptom or an example of a bigger problem in the regulatory state that really is crushing dreams and hurting people who are trying to start new enterprises and hire people. But I would look at a couple of those resources would be my recommendation.
Question right here.
Thank you all for being here. And this is a real important topic. So I've met a lot of folks that stay at a certain level because they receive services, and it gets to the point that hinders them. They don't want to move on. I'm active in Austin. Anyways, I've also met folks that got money for having dependent children, as well as the extra COVID money, whatever, and they bought homes. Some of them are going to start losing them. Where do these people go out, after everything? Because they're in that vicious circle. What happens next to them? They're going to be homeless one day, unfortunately. Any comments?
Yeah. Sure. Randy, or Daniel?
I briefly, and then these guys will have some good stuff. I think it's such a tragic illustration of the real problems in the system. And the key, which is, it's not easy, and it requires big change, not just little change, is helping again to smooth those pathways back into work and opportunity. The problem, as you exactly note, is there's, sort of all too often, well-intended but poorly executed cash or things thrown at people with no real vision for how we help move back to that place, or for sometimes the first time to that place of dignity and sufficiency. That's right. It's very short-sighted.
Yeah, I would say it's a very short-term perspective, right? And that's one of the big issues we see in this, is we don't have this long-term perspective with these people of how to actually move through this. And that's why in the empowerment accounts and some of these other things, we really want these community advocates to help them actually think about that and start plotting out their lives, not just what does the next 6, 12, 18 months look like. And these programs, we've said earlier, they provide really perverse incentives sometimes. And so smoothing some of that out, as Daniel talked about, I think is really important and unfortunate. I think based on what's happening in the economy, you're going to see some real pain in some of these communities. But hopefully it leads to some of these changes that we need to see happen.
And I think you hit on that moral urgency that we have right now to start building those pathways to work, so that you just don't fall off without income 1 month because you have been depending on the safety net to show up a cash infusion.
Rachel, can I just add one quick thing too? I think this is where civil society really needs to step up as well. And we can do that, right? We can encourage in some government, the government programs, but this is where churches and community centers and civic organizations, this is the moment, you know, if Alexis de Tocqueville was correct in the unique nature of the American experiment, this is the moment we can see these civic organizations and groups show up, and we need them now more than ever. And so I would just add, you know, for those of us involved, and lots of people here I know involved in those, this is the time to encourage them to get involved.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because this is the reason that TPF and GCO and Pelican are involved. Is this is the heart of conservatism, right? Like, it's about community and building out community and taking care of your community and not depending on the government to do it. And so in some of these hard times, we really have to look inward and take that on ourselves. But while we know these programs are out there, how do we help people actually work through them?
I can add a couple thoughts on that too. What they said is dead on. Totally agree. I would echo that with you. One of the things we often say at GCO is that the best government can do is deal with people as they are. But it's through relationships and civil society and communities of faith that we can deal with people as they ought to be and how they aspire to be. It happens through relationship. And so when we think about all these public policies, we've also always got to be thinking about how whether or not it hinders or frees up civil society to perform its function. Now, one of the things we've done at GCO, and we're a little different in this regard, we have a couple community-based employment initiatives where we're coordinating the efforts of businesses, nonprofits, churches to identify the chronically un- and underemployed, help them get trained and into the workforce. So what we're saying there, basically to community leaders, you know, we all say to state leaders, don't wait for the federal government to act, take action. Well, we also say to local leaders, don't wait for the state to act, right? You can do things in your community now. I mean, if you identify as a limited government conservative and you believe in civil society, how about leveraging civil society to solve some of these problems and get engaged in that way?
And I'll also just add that a core underpinning when we think through these policies is that each person is individual, and the circumstances that lead them into poverty, into safety nets, are individual. Mine was, you know, I had a disability. Some people have, you know, mental illness. Some people, it's just bad luck at a time. Every person's path is individual. So to expect these government programs who aren't personalized and are fractured to be able to heal that is unreasonable. And so this point of civil society, where people are going to get individualized help, it's at that individual level.
And let me add to that too. She just described a lot of different situations I might put somebody at risk and in poverty. I think it's really important that we recognize there are some people who truly need government assistance and will probably need it on an ongoing basis. We need to recognize that. We need to maintain a level of empathy for our fellow Americans kind of caught in the system, but those also who are being kept from destitution because of the system, and appreciate that, right? The problem is, and it's a massive problem, is that too many people are actually stuck, and they really would climb out and experience, you know, that good life that they desire if we eliminated some of these barriers. Yeah, yes, multi-generational issues as well.
Yeah, we see this kind of like tyranny of low expectations, right? And I think that's what gets people stuck, is that we just think, well, they can't do better, and we shouldn't, you know, we just keep them in this as opposed to working with them individually on how they actually can get out of it.
But here, 5 more minutes for maybe one more deep question.
Not, I know Daniel likes to sing, so he could.
All right, I will ask one question if I don't see
Thank
either.
you for saving everyone.
I don't want to. These guys are known for duets. We don't want one of those. So we know that a lot of these programs have their origination at the federal level, right? These are controlled by federal committees. The dollars flow to states. Therefore, states don't have total control over these dollars. Can you kind of end with, I know I said states have to act first. So what is the balance between states acting first and waiting for the federal government to do something?
So I'll start, and then these guys will fill in with better information probably. So the states do have limited flexibility in what they can do with many of the government assistance programs, but they're not powerless. There's flexibility within many programs. So one of the obvious things states can do is audit the programs to make sure that they're serving the right people. Because look, again, and I know both TPPF and Pelican have successfully launched audits. We're in the process of pursuing those audits in Georgia, but that's super important because most lawmakers don't have any idea that how the programs are performing. And often they're underperforming terribly. Every audit reveals it. There's never been an audit that said, wow, that's working really well. It does not exist, but you have to get a look at it. So audits are super important. States can streamline even now. In Georgia, we did streamline a number of programs. That has helped. And it's put us actually in a position for when the Utah model passes, and we believe it will, we'll be in a good situation because the state's already done some streamlining. They can weed out some of the waste and fraud. So there are things that can be done now. And those are some. Audits are huge.
Agree with all that, obviously. The other thing, just setting aside sort of policy questions of this, governors and lawmakers, state legislators have a bully pulpit to talk about these issues. And even where there are places that the federal government is preventing action, or, like in the Utah model idea that where change is required, members of Congress, national leaders, they need to hear from the state leaders saying, we want this. This is important. We can do great things if you will change. So I think pushing that line, as Randy said, to do the things that can be done as fast and as aggressively as possible, but at the same time, empowering state lawmakers at every level and local leaders as well to say this has to change and to lead and cast a vision for what can happen. We know Rachel mentioned this earlier, the drive for so many of the best reforms that have freed people, that have given people opportunity, have started at the states and ended up in Washington. And that's what I believe will happen here, but it requires a whole lot of voices, which is why we decided to take on this work together. One state alone, one leader alone can't do this. It's going to take a real movement. And so I would encourage, for those of you who are in state government or local or leaders, get involved and just start pushing and talking about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's all right. I'd co-sign everything you just said. And the audits, being an Austin resident, right, we try to avoid these audits at all costs. Our city government is very afraid of them. And it's also really interesting bipartisan issue because everyone wants to know if their program's working, is it doing what it's supposed to do? So it shouldn't be as controversial as it is. But I think the transparency that we can bring is really good. And I think the bully pulpit is really good too, because that's where these reforms usually happen, is we can show proof of concept in the states and take some of those changes federally. I also think one of the other things we can really do is start setting expectations. We talked a little bit about the metrics for how we measure all this. The states can really do a lot there. We see this in homelessness issue. The housing first stuff is coming out of DC, and it's totally corrupted and made the homelessness issue that we see here in Austin and in Texas much worse. And I think sending a signal from the state that they actually have different expectations of those programs and the delivery of those services would really help move things along and what the feds are trying to do, and also and how the services are delivered here locally. And so that'd be maybe the one thing I'd add to that.
And one last thought from me, take heart. We are in a lot of different settings. I know that's true of us at GCO, where we're working in the community and very diverse politically, ethnically. And you know what? Everybody sees these things as problems. Everybody wants to do something when they hear about what's going on. So take heart. This isn't just a pipe dream. The reality is people are starting to recognize that human beings actually derive something great from working and being engaged in the community and being connected with their fellow citizens. So take heart. I think good things are coming.
That's great, Randy. Well, we will end with that very inspiring note. And I will encourage you all to go to allianceforopportunity.com, where you can learn how to join us in these efforts. Thank you.